In the early 1990s, West Memphis, Arkansas, was a tight-knit working-class community. This was the kind of neighborhood where families were deeply interconnected, doors were left unlocked, and kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. Then, 3 local boys went missing, and their bodies were discovered in a drainage ditch. The sheer brutality of the crime sent the town into immediate shock, leaving behind a terrifying vacuum where answers should have been. Without immediate suspects, the deep trust that defined the neighborhood fractured. People began looking at the guy next door or the cashier at the grocery store through a lens of deep paranoia. When a town hurts this badly, the desperation for an explanation overrides everything else. Any narrative that offers an answer and a promise of safety becomes instantly compelling, no matter how extreme it sounds. Across the country, a cultural hysteria known as the Satanic Panic was dominating headlines, a widespread fear that secret occult groups were operating in America's shadows. For West Memphis, this national fear perfectly fit the shape of their local tragedy. Shows like Inside Edition and other sensationalized tabloid television programs flooded into the town. They broadcast local whispers to millions of viewers, creating a feedback loop that suddenly gave these occult rumors a terrifying legitimacy. Police quickly zeroed in on 3 local teenagers, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. Investigators began treating their black clothing and interest in heavy metal as a psychological profile for murder, focusing the probe on their subculture rather than physical evidence at the scene. The sheer volume of the television broadcasts and the terrified whispers created a loop so loud that it completely overwrote basic logic. A terrified community willingly abandoned the presumption of innocence. The real trial actually took place in living rooms across the city. Within local social circles, actively supporting the prosecution's satanic cult narrative became a mandatory requirement to be a member of the community. Publicly defending the teenagers meant inviting immediate hostility. To suggest their innocence was to signal you were out of step with the community's safety, threatening you with social exile. This dynamic took a devastating emotional toll. Families stopped speaking to each other. Congregations split down the middle. The desperation to capture the killers ended up pitting neighbors directly against one another. Because these rumors permeated every church and workplace, finding an impartial jury became an impossible task. The local consensus was so overwhelming that by the time the trial began, the prosecution's narrative was already accepted as common knowledge. When maintaining your relationships and social standing requires conforming to a collective panic, objective facts stop being helpful. They are treated as a direct threat. The objective arena of the courtroom is designed to filter out that exact kind of noise. This is the space where evidence and cold, hard facts are supposed to carry more weight than public fear. Looking at this forensic breakdown, we can see the core failure of the trial. The prosecution claimed the victims' injuries were undeniable proof of an occult ritual. However, scientists later confirmed these specific marks were the result of post-mortem predation, meaning animals like turtles and fish naturally interacted with the bodies after they were submerged in the water. Notice the missing links here. Despite the prosecution weaving a massive, intricate story of a ritual sacrifice, there was absolutely zero physical evidence. No DNA, no hair, no clothing fibers tied any of the 3 teenagers to the woods that day. When modern defense teams finally plotted out the exact timing of the injuries and the environmental data, the math failed. The prosecution's sequence of events was physically impossible based on when the victims were last seen. The jury had a choice. They could weigh messy, contradictory scientific data, or they could accept a simple, terrifying story of evil that matched the rumors they already believed. They chose the story. The sheer volume of public panic successfully masked the technical errors in the state's case. All 3 teenagers were found guilty, and Damian Eccles was sentenced to death. It took nearly 2 decades of legal battles for the men to finally walk free. They were released in 2011 using an Alford plea, a complex legal maneuver that allowed them to maintain their innocence while the state officially kept their guilty convictions on the books. While the men in this photo got their lives back, the reality is that the murders of 3 young children remain completely unresolved. The actual perpetrator was never brought to justice. Locking up the wrong people based on hysteria gave a terrified town permission to exhale. But in exchange for that temporary relief, they accepted a permanent failure of justice. Back in West Memphis today, the national media is long gone, but the invisible wreckage from the trial is deeply felt across these neighborhoods. Releasing the West Memphis Three did not heal the local rifts. The families who openly accused neighbors and people who spent years being treated as accomplices still live side by side, carrying decades of betrayal. The deepest trauma lingering here is the quiet, collective memory of how easily the community discarded its own rules, pointing fingers at innocent kids the moment things turned dark. When cultural hysteria silences objective evidence, the town loses the ability to trust its own neighbors. West Memphis became a place where fear, not facts, dictated who belonged and who was a monster.